Today, we'll be taking our first look at the reward for the ongoing November 2023 campaign Tier 8 Premium Japanese Battleship Hizen. Or Hizen, maybe? I'm going to call it Hizen because that's how it looks like it should be pronounced to me. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize to anybody who is offended by incorrect pronunciations. I mean, not really, because it doesn't matter all that much. The Hizen, in my opinion, is kind of a mediocre ship. It's not bad, it's not great, but it must not be that bad because I've played about 19 games in it so far in order to get a feel, and I think I've got a 74% win rate across those 19 games. So this ship can't be too bad, or at least I must not be facing very good teams. In any case, I'll give you a rundown on the stats. I'll talk about how it plays and whether I think it's worth picking up as the reward. Actually, spoiler alert, I think it is worth buying the Admiralty backing just because it is a decent Tier 8 premium battleship, and of course you get a lot of goodies along the way for the campaign. But to begin with, Hizen has 75,900 hit points, which, seems right in line for a Tier 8 battleship. It's fairly robust HP pool. It's also got 37% torpedo damage reduction, and that is actually, I think, a little bit higher than your typical battleship would have. Still, you don't want to be taking torpedoes in this thing. The guns, I suppose, would be the highlight. There are 12 of them set in 4 triple turrets. They are 410 millimeter guns, so 16-inch, same size as the Imagi at Tier 7 or the Izumo or Iwami at Tier 8. I've got a range of 19.9 kilometers with this Commander build, and I guess it'd probably be a good idea to put that on the screen. The Commander is my standard battleship build for the IJN battleships. It's Takagi with Iakino and Kondo as inspirations. The guns with this build reload in 30.1 seconds. They take 36.7 seconds to turn 180 degrees. Maximum AP shell damage, 13,310. Of course, that's with gyrating drill bits influencing the commander build, and I want to talk a little bit more about that skill once we get to the maneuverability, because I'm not convinced it's worth it for this particular battleship. HE characteristics are also surprisingly good in one sense, but terribly mediocre in another. The HE shells do a maximum damage of 6,500, which is actually quite potent. It's almost British levels of HE damage. However, the fire chance on these guns is only 30%, which actually that sounds low, but there are 12 guns, so this might be a fairly effective fire starter. You can see we've switched to the HE against the Republique, who for whatever reason is playing that ship bow in, and we do get an instant fire on him. So the HE might not be all that bad for situations like this. Although the 30.1 second reload time, well, that is buffed from the commander build in some way. I think that might be because I'm using the reload mod in the 4th slot. Otherwise, the base reload on this thing is 33.5 seconds, which you can kind of understand given that there are 12 guns on it. And then, if we go to the AA defense stats, there's not much worth mentioning there. It's got an overall AA defense rating of 72, for whatever that's worth. I don't know how much information that number actually gives you, but none of the AA stats blow anything out of the water, and this doesn't seem like a ship that is fully capable of defending itself, especially from legendary tier carriers. So, AA, not great, not a surprise either. Maneuverability, though, that is what I think is the real low light on this ship. The turning circle is 880 meters, which isn't that bad. The rudder shift is 18 seconds, which is a little slow. But the real problem is the top speed. I've only got it at 26.9 knots, which means when you're maneuvering, you're hitting more like 23, 24 knots at best, and that is very slow for a battleship at the second highest tier in the game. It really feels like it's a chore to get around the map and reposition, But the reason, of course, that the speed is 26.9 kilometers is because I've got gyrating drill bits on the commander build. Now, gyrating drill bits, I think, is an interesting skill that practically everybody runs on battleship commanders like Takagi or William Sims. And I think people run it without question because it does provide two really, really good buffs to your ship. Number one, it increases the maximum AP damage by 10%, which is a big number. In fact, that's how we've got the 13,000 AP maximum damage. Otherwise, it's more like 12,000 something. And it also buffs the turret traverse by a tremendous degree, which is why we have 36-second turret traverse. Otherwise, I think the turret traverse time at base is around 45 or 50 seconds. So those are two really good benefits to have, but the trade-off for getting those benefits through gyrating drill bits is that that skill cuts the top speed down by 10%. So the Hizen's base speed is like 29 knots, and we've cut it down to 26. I kind of think that is too much of a downside for this ship. I would rather take gyrating drill bits off and use the other skill that cuts down the turret traverse only a little bit, but doesn't buff the maximum AP shell damage and doesn't reduce the speed. If you go with that skill, you have a turret traverse time of 39 seconds, and your AP shells don't do quite as much damage. But at the same time, you can hit almost 30 knots of speed, especially when you use the speed flag on the ship. And that allows you to reposition a little bit better, which I think is useful for this thing because it just feels a little too slow with gyrating drill bits. And in fact, that's something I think about from time to time on my battleship builds. I've been taking gyrating drill bits off other ships, like most recently the Minnesota, because speed is a value in this game for a battleship. It's what allows you to position effectively, along, by the way, with concealment. And the concealment here is very good. I'm not sure what the base value is, but I, of course, build practically all of my battleships with Concealment mod and with a rank 16 Condo as inspiration, and obviously the story's no different here. So with those two things, the detectability by sea on the Hizen, with its 12 16-inch guns, is 12.6 kilometers. Very good, very stealthy. Of course, there's no CVs in this game, and when there is a CV, it kind of negates that advantage, but in games with all surface ships, it does make it easier to position this thing. The armor, likewise, seems pretty good, along with the HP pool. It can tank quite a lot from other battleships. Of course, it can be overmatched through the bow and stern by the likes of Yamato and Musashi, and the stern has sort of a ledge on it that can function as a bit of a shell catcher, although I haven't run into too many problems with it while kiting away. And that's sort of how I think this ship is best played. It reminds me a lot of the Amagi, because the turret configuration is so similar, with all the turrets down the center line of the ship instead of something unusual like the Tech Tree Izumo at Tier 8, which has all its turrets on the bow. This thing feels like more of a successor to the Amagi in many ways. After all, it's got the same gun size, and it's got 2 extra guns in a more modern turret setup. So I think it's best played like the Amagi at longer to medium ranges while kiting. You've got a lot of range with these guns. They are pretty accurate as well. You saw that there against the Anchorage, which we dev struck. So it's one of those longer to mid-range snipers of a battleship, although it can tank, it can push in, and it can play somewhat aggressively, although that's not necessarily recommended due to the fairly slow top speed when you're using gyrating drill bits and the rather sluggish rudder time of 18 seconds. Nevertheless, it's a decent ship, although it strikes me as somewhat mediocre, and it is, after all, the third IJN premium battleship that we've gotten at Tier 8 as the reward for a campaign, following the Musashi, which, of course, has 18-inch guns that can overmatch 32 millimeters of armor, and the Iwami, which has the same gun size as this, but also gets torpedoes, so it's a little bit unique in that way. And as a consequence, I'm not sure what kind of case the ship really makes for itself to exist as an alternative that you might want. But, the Admiralty backing is a good deal, I think, in this campaign, so it's probably worth buying, if not necessarily for the ship, then for all the goodies you get along the way. But my verdict on this is fairly mediocre. Let me know what you think in the comments. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.